Cool. Mhm.
All right, so I'm live with my first episode with our special guest today, Ronnie Baker. I feel like that's a really big guest to kick this off with. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with Ronnie. Obviously, we've chatted back and forth like a few times, but this is probably our first time we've had like a real sort of like face-to-face conversation, even though it's not in person, it's still virtual. It's our
Yeah,
first kind of face-to-face. So, hey, Ronnie, how you doing? Thank you for joining me.
I'm doing good, David, man. It's actually good, like again, face to face. We've had a lot of conversations on social media, but
Yeah.
to actually get to talk to each other is a good, it feels good. It feels right.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you can hear me now because I know that you couldn't when I first logged on. So yeah, I'm glad the tech's working. So we're good to go. Um, so basically I wanted to set up a podcast just speaking with elite track and field athletes, sprinters in particular, and just really kind of talk about how they're training because I don't feel like there's too much of that out there. There's a little bit of it, but there's plenty of podcasts where we're interviewing coaches, but I really wanted to kind of try and get the athlete's perspective on things. Um,
Right.
but before we really get into your training, I'd love to kind of touch on the background and find a little bit about I guess, your background in general, but also your athletic background. So can you maybe tell the listeners a little bit about where you grew up? Because I know you grew up in a few different places. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as far as like, kind of going backtracking a little bit with my, athletics, I guess like things that I did when I was younger. What's really cool is that I actually was born in Louisville, Kentucky, which is basically where I call home. But I actually went to when I was 5 years old, moved to Alaska. So I actually lived in Anchorage, Alaska for a while. It was freezing cold there. I do not like cold weather. We're dealing with a lot of that right now in Texas. Like
We
it
are.
is. I mean, and the crazy thing is that all the Europeans are like, cold. This isn't cold. Like I tell them that's 40 degrees, and they're like, that's a great day to train. I'm like, yeah, that's very interesting because 40 here is like you're debating on like what you're gonna do. You're like
It's all
trying to
relative.
figure
I
out.
feel like temperature's all relative.
Yeah, it's like you're like for us, that's like, all right, we need to figure out what we're doing today. It might not be sprints, it could be something else. We need to change the workout. I feel like them, it's just like a normal day. Like they 40 degrees, 40 Fahrenheit for them is like let's get after it. So but yeah, so I lived in Anchorage for 7 years. I did cross country. So a lot of people, talk about moving from, that I think the big topic is like Fred Curley going from the 400 to the
Mhm.
100, but that's exactly, I did that. I did that when I was coming up. So I did a lot of longer distance running. I did cross country. I actually ran the 400. And then I moved down actually when I got to college, which is pretty interesting. But so I grew up at Alaska 7 years and then moved back to Louisville, Kentucky. I was there pretty much from the time I was in middle school, so about sixth grade, all the way through high school. So sixth, seventh, eighth, and then eighth through 12th, and then I came to Texas to go to TCU. So as far as like where I live, those are kind of the places. Haven't lived anywhere else. If I could pick, I'd pick warm. That's I think that was one of the big reasons why I went to Texas. I came to Texas because it was hot. I knew it'd be warmer than where I was. So
Okay, and then so like just circling back and kind of you said that you ran a lot of cross country in Alaska. Was cross country big there because of the climate, or is that just kind of coincidental that you were involved in cross country in a cold place?
interestingly enough, I don't even remember if there was like a track team. Like we didn't have very many sports at our school growing up. Like I
Okay.
think when I was like we got a basketball team in Alaska, like right when I was getting ready to move back to Louisville. So like we had 1 year of like elementary school basketball, which is pretty crazy. And nuts. Like I didn't even know that when I got to Texas, when I went to like some like national meets and stuff, that's when I found out that like kids actually do track and field when they're like 5. Like I didn't
Right.
even know that existed. So like that was never a thing. I think that cross country was like one of those things, maybe because it was colder climate. That's one thing that was like a big deal where we had cross country meets where it was like hundreds of kids like would line up and like people would like fall at the line because there's like it's like a marathon. Like that's how it was. Like that's how it looked. It's a bunch of kids. You run through like this course. It's like the woods. It's freezing cold. You've got like hoodies and hats and jackets and all kinds of stuff. And you're like alone by yourself for like it's only like a mile. But when you're like that, when you're that small, a mile feels like it feels like a marathon. I feel
Yeah,
like
there
you're
you
running
go.
for like an
Infinite.
hour.
Do you know what I mean? That's sort of my experience of when I think of cross country. That's what I think of. I think of like running outside in the woods in the cold around a wet muddy field, something like that. When I
Yeah.
first moved down to Texas about 18 months ago, and I went to the first cross country meet. It was September in Houston, and I was like, this is almost too hot for a sprint. Like it just didn't resonate. And we took some athletes up to Spokane. Um, at the very end of November to run in a meet up there. And I think it was a shock for some of them. Some of the cross country athletes, they'd only run in Texas cross country. And
Yeah.
then they got up to Spokane and it was, yeah, it was a little different to what they were used to. But that's how I remember cross country. That's what I think of when I think of cross country.
That's what I think of too. I think of like running through the woods and basically like there's no one around but you and the other runners. And like for me, when we were younger, they'd always tell us like be aware of like deer and stuff because like
Oh,
you're
really?
out there, like they don't really, it's not like it's a clear course. There's like when I ran, there's like branches and twigs and just it was just mud. It's like potholes. Like you just got to make sure you don't fall into any of them. Like get to the finish line. That's
Yeah.
how I envision cross country.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. The first one that I was at here, there was a girl running barefoot, and I'm thinking, where I'm from, you wouldn't run barefoot. You wouldn't run barefoot for cross country. No way.
You don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
All right. Okay. So um, I guess that's kind of sort of pretty much picked up on one of the first questions I wanted to ask you. So it was just kind of cross country. That was sort of the main sport that you did kind of growing up. Were there any other sports that you were involved in throughout your childhood?
Yeah, so I did cross country, kind of was my first real sport that I actually participated and competed in. And then I did basketball. I really enjoyed that. That was like what pretty much when I started like in elementary school all the way through like playing in high school. I played basketball. I played a little football. Like I did one season of Pee Wee football, which is like I don't even remember how old it was, but it was in Alaska, so it was cold. We played in the snow. I did one season of that. Our team was really good. We actually ended up going to like the state championship. We lost in the state championship, but I mean, for me, I didn't really fall in love with it like I did basketball. So I just stuck to playing basketball for the rest of like, growing up. I did one season of football and that was it. So those are kind of my sports is running, basically cross country. I did track when I got to middle school and then basketball and a little football mixed in here and there.
So predominantly throughout your kind of middle school and high school career, you were a two-sport athlete. So you did basketball and track and field. They were your
Yep, basketball and track and field, and I loved basketball. That was like my thing. But I realized that I was just way faster than
right.
most
Okay.
kids, and so that's kind of the path that I had to choose. Really, kind of chose me, honestly.
Okay. So it was a fairly sort of like obvious decision, kind of where you were gonna go with that regard.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. All right. Okay. Cool. So so you say you were like way faster. So kind of how successful were you as a high school sprinter? Like, were you winning state titles? And kind of what maybe some of your times as you were kind of going through the different grade levels?
Yeah, so I actually, interestingly enough, so this will be good for people listening to this, but also some of the viewers that are watching on Instagram right now, because everyone always asks me like, what times were you running when you were like freshman in high school, and like what were your times? And so I'll tell you this: when I was in middle school, I don't remember a lot of my times. I do remember in middle school, one time I ran the 100. I think I ran like 13.2 or something. That was probably like sixth grade. So you can imagine, I don't even know what age you are in sixth grade, but that was, I think it was around that time. I ended up actually won that race. Pretty crazy. So that's the only time I remember from middle school. Now, when I got to high school, um, I remember 400 was my main event. So I started off and I probably ran like, dude, when I was a freshman, I probably ran like 52. I honestly, I could look it up. I could look at my mile split times. I can tell you it was probably like 52, 53 seconds. So that's what I was running as a freshman. And then kind of when I started to come down a little bit was my junior year. So junior year, I remember running 51, then I ran like 50, then I ran 49. So like, I think my junior year, I think my personal best that year was probably 49 seconds. So like, for all y'all out there that are like, I don't know if I can make it. I'm junior and I only run 50 seconds. Like that was me. I was not that fast as a junior in high school. Like I was not out there blazing it up, like just destroying people. Like the crazy thing is that in Louisville, Kentucky, like that was fast for when I was there. So like
Right.
I was one of the best guys, but like 49 in comparison to like the whole country, I mean, that's like it's nothing, you know? Um
Yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that so kind of a couple of points that I find quite interesting is that there was a study that came out or some statistic that came out from British athletes probably about 2 years ago, and it was speaking about like the number of athletes that represent Great Britain as a junior athlete. So we're talking at under 20 level. That
yeah.
therefore, that following that, go on to represent Britain as a senior, and it was quite staggeringly low. So I think that
Hmm.
obviously, kind of you get your outliers. People like Usain Bolt and like somebody like Arian Knighton as well. That's kind of running these times as juniors and when they're really young, and obviously that translates to a senior success as well. But typically, I'm not sure how good a predictor of senior success running light or relatively lightning fast times as a junior is. I think quite often you get these, you get athletes that I'm sure there's plenty that have sort of like peaked at around 18 years old, and they run a time at 18. You think, oh, imagine what they're going to do in 5 years' time, and then 5 years' time, they're not even running as fast as they do at 18. So I think it's more for your Instagram viewers, but like anybody that's listening, that's kind of going through high school and maybe worrying that they're not setting the world alight at the moment. I don't think that that's something that they need to panic about.
No, I don't think so either. And I think that if you get caught up in if you can get as a young athlete, you can get caught up in watching the professionals
Mm-hmm.
and then feeling like you should be able to run those times. And I think that's kind of where I think that it was a blessing for me that when I was younger, I didn't even know anything about track and field.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I wasn't really paying, not that you shouldn't pay attention. I think if you're a young athlete and you aspire to run fast, like you should definitely watch the pros and you should know them. Just like, just like the guys that play basketball, they watch professional basketball. You should watch professional track and you should download a VPN and try to watch as many track meets as you can. But yeah, like I think that was a blessing for me because I didn't necessarily compare myself to them. I just kind of like naturally developed. And I just tried to get better and better every single year. Like that was my main thing. It's just like, how can I get better every single year, every single time I like stepped on track? And my coach always motivated us with like external like pizza parties and all kinds of stuff. So like that was fun for me. I really enjoyed that because it was like, hey, look, if you run a 49, I'll get everyone pizza. I'm like, all right, I got it. So I remember
yeah.
running that. I remember running 49 that day, break like doing a personal best. It was awesome. And so those are fun times of the 400. Running the 400 now is just it's not
Not
fun
so
at
much
all.
fun.
Literally not fun at
It'd
all.
take a lot of pizza to tempt you around, right?
Oh yeah, pizza for life. Yeah, you're pizza for life. I'll run. I can try to run 44 for pizza for life, but anything else, probably not.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you were making as well about like comparing yourself to professional athletes, and I think it's a double-edged sword in terms of the it is so easy. You've got this metric that you can compare yourself to professional athletes, and so, but it's obviously not realistic to go in there thinking that okay, I'm 15, 16 years old. Wow, these guys are running 9.7. I'm running 11 flat or whatever you're running. And it's not realistic to think that you're going to be in the ballpark yet. Obviously, maybe as a mid teenager, your mindset isn't realistic anyway. It's easier to get kind of caught up in that comparison.
Right.
But I think for me, that's probably one of the things that makes track and field so seductive is the fact that it is objective data. You can like, there's not really too much of a debate of like, you're faster than you. I don't think you're faster than you. Like, okay, well, let's see what your times are. If your time is faster, then you're faster than that. So,
Right.
it's like there's positives and negatives with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so right throughout high school, so you were a 400-meter runner. So you were recruited to go to TCU as a 400-meter runner?
Yeah, mainly. I ran at that time. I remember coming out of like high school, I had run 40. My PRs were 47.1, which is like 47.17 or 1.8.
Mm-hmm.
I ran that at the state meet. So that was like personal best out of like that was the last meet I ran.
Okay, so a big time performer from the get go then.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
47.1. I ran 21.3 in the 200. and then I ran at the state meet that year. I ran 10.7, but that I think that previous summer I had run 10.5. Like I ran 10.5 one time in my life.
Okay.
So those were my times. And basically I got recruited mainly as a 400-meter runner, but coach was like, hey, this guy's got some decent foot speed. So he kind of was like seeing a full picture of, hey, he can do multiple events kind of thing.
Okay. So you got to TCU, and then how did it sort of end up transpiring that obviously you started TCU as a, I don't want to call you a specialist, but like predominantly for the 400 meters, and then the first time you really came on my radar, you were, I mean, potentially a 60 guy. Not, I mean, like definitely a 100 guy, but potentially a 60 guy as well. So how did that kind of you sort of like graduate your way down from 400 meters down to the 100 and the 60?
That's a very good question. So I was doing, when I got to TCU, I would come to practice, and the crazy thing is that I never would know if I was going to be with the quarter mile group or if I was going to be with the sprint group. And every day I just prayed that I was with the sprint group. So I was like, man, please let me be the sprint group. But I kind of mix and match. So my workout was kind of like Monday, I might do a quarter mile workout. Tuesday, I might do a sprint workout, and it could be interchangeable depending on where coach wanted me, what he wanted me to do. So as I was like my freshman year, I remember running a lot of 400s. I ran indoor and outdoor. I did not run a lot of 60s my first 2 years. So I think I ran like 160 meters. And I think I ran like 6.7 my freshman or sophomore year. And I didn't run very many 60s. I started running more 60s in my junior year, but that was because in the outdoor season in my first 2 years, freshman and sophomore, I ran like all the events. So I would go to some meets and I'd run 100, a 200, a 400, and a 4x4. Like I was getting after it. So,
Okay.
um, and so I guess just from like what coach was seeing in the practices and seeing my foot speed, like I got a chance in my sophomore year when we went to regionals. I had actually qualified for all three. So I qualified to go to regionals in the 400, the 100, and the 200. And at the time, my coach was like, hey, we already had like 3 400-meter guys, specialists per se. And he was like, hey, do you want to run the 400 or do you want to run the 1 and 2? And of course, like every sprinter would do, they say, I want to run the 1 and 2. So I got taken off the 400 open at that meet. It was in Arkansas, I remember it. And that year I ran 10:18, and I also ran I don't remember my PR. It's like not that fast. It was like a 20. I think I ran like 20 high, 20-point high, something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, ever since that year, which was I believe that was my sophomore year of college, I never went back to running 400s outside of the 4x4. And I think that was just because of the practices and the development and the progression. I was like, my coach was seeing me doing the sprint workouts more than the longer stuff with the quarter milers.
Okay. All right. And it lucked out for you because it meant you didn't have to run any full laps.
Yeah, no more full laps for me.
All right. Okay. Excellent. So, um, let's I'd love to kind of get into a little bit more detail. And I know I'm not asking you to give anything away because I know that you kind of got you just kind of launched your training program online, which I'll let you speak about in a little bit as well. But maybe you could sort of like outline, I guess, as a collegiate athlete and whether it's changed or not since you turned professional, kind of what a typical week of training might look like for you.
Yeah. And I think I outlined a little bit of kind of the structure of this on my Instagram. I did a Couch Chronicles. I'm kind of like, I think you asked this
I think
question.
I did. Yeah, I think I did ask it.
Yeah, which is a great topic. Because more than anything, I think that the structure of like a week and the structure of a program is really important, especially like just with progression, because you don't, people always ask me like, hey, what should I do for the speed workout? And I'm like, I could give you a speed workout, but it's like, have you done the base stuff to be able to do that? Because if you sprint too fast too early, it's grounds for injuries. It's grounds for like your knees feeling terrible, and like you just don't want to go through that, right? And so there's a lot of people that have different training philosophies. I think that for me, a lot of the stuff that I did in college works, and a lot of that stuff we still do now. The intensity in which we do them is higher. So that's the thing, is like, when you're going from, competing at the collegiate level, and this is one thing that I always tell even collegiate athletes that talk to me, they're always, again, comparing themselves to the professionals. And it's like, hey, you just need to worry about winning a collegiate title. Like, you're not like, win the collegiate title first and then talk about, the pro stuff. But like,
Hmm.
handle business there first. And that was always my perspective, is like, handle business. Let's win the college, like let's win NCAAs, and then let's talk about pros. But as far as like the structuring of the workouts, and what's cool is that me and my coach have actually gone through. I felt like there was a need and kind of a void for like exactly what track and field athletes are doing in practice. Like, I think that everyone kind of gets, they kind of throw out what they do a little bit here and there, but it's very vague. It's very like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hey, we did some sprints, we did some 20s and 30s. Like, they're not really getting into the details. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to give people that access, because people always ask what we do, what to do, how to do it. And the cool thing about Elite Speed 360, which is my website, in our business, is that it literally gives you day by day, and you've seen some of the stuff. It gives you day
Yeah.
by day drills. It gives you day by day workouts. It tells you, percentages. It tells you, hey, this is what we do in the weight room, which is really cool. Now, for as far as like structuring kind of a week, I would say, I think that you've got to have you got to have like a power development day in there, right? You've got to have a sprint day in there. You also have to have some kind of conditioning, right, type of workout, which is
Hmm.
going to be some of your longer stuff. And then usually in between those days are like, I wouldn't say recovery days, but they're more tempo, right?
Yeah.
And so it would be like, you come on Monday, you're doing your conditioning. That's going to be the one that you're not going to like. If you're an athlete. Yeah, that's the one you're gonna dread. That's the one that's gonna be longer. That's the one that's gonna have you on the ground, lactic acid. Like, that's the Monday, right? Tuesday would be a tempo day, and the cool thing with tempo days is that you can kind of you can tailor them to where you can have it as a tempo day, but you also can have it as a conditioning day as well. So you can kind of back to back those as like, hey, we might do some 200s, but we're going to do this many, and we're going to do this rest, and we're going to make it faster, or we're going to make it slower, depending on what you want to do. Because if the athlete after that first day is like, man, I'm like exhausted and my legs hurt and they're super tired, then you're going to have that tempo day probably a little lighter, so that
Yeah.
on Wednesday you can come back and do your sprint day. Like, the whole goal is to maximize the conditioning day, the sprint day, and the power day. The tempo days, honestly, you don't, I personally, you can use them in a lot of different ways, but I think that those are kind of the days of like, hey, let's make sure that we do something, get our heart rate up, let's work on some tempo, maybe race pace, I don't know, not race pace stuff, but just tempo stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of get your body right so that we can sprint on Wednesday. And that's
Yeah.
another, yeah, go
So
ahead.
I was just going to say that there's a book, and it's called something like The Secrets of Training. I can't remember. I'll have to find it, and if I work out how to do show notes, I'm going to put it in the show notes. But it's a book by a guy called Dan Cleather, and he divides his training up into hot sessions, or he has what he calls hot sessions, and they're the important sessions of the week, and all the other sessions are designed so as not to interfere with those hot sessions. And I feel like that's kind of what you're saying here. So you've kind of got the power session, the speed session, and the conditioning session, and the other, they're the focus, and everything else that goes around those sessions are there to facilitate and to make sure that you're getting the maximum benefit from those three workouts. And so if you need to
That
back off on the tempo days, then you do that to make sure you're not compromising those three main sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. Even going back to even last week, it was kind of cold. So we had that 1 or 2 days where it was going to be warmer, and we had a sprint session. And that's like, my coach is like, hey, he's like, we're going to do this conditioning, which we did. We did some 300s that week. But he's like, this middle day, we did some 150s, which is kind of like a tempo day. And we're getting to the point where those are going to be more sprints, because they're going to be longer rests, but we're doing, 5 times 150. That's kind of like that middle day.
Mhm.
But then that Thursday was like, hey, we're going to sprint. And he's like, hey, make sure that you guys are good, your bodies are good, because that's the day that we need to maximize. And so it is kind of like that. They have those hot sessions where it's like, all right, this is the one that we need.
Mhm.
So if we need to back off on this tempo day, then we'll back off. We're not going to just push you into, getting your body super tired and then try to have you sprint. So
How do
um,
you find? Sorry to just that just made me want to come up with a
yeah.
question. That like, do you find it difficult, or do you feel like you need to discipline yourself to be able to kind of hold back on those submax sessions? So I always feel like definitely for some athletes, I think it can be challenging, especially if you're running with a training partner, and then if they're
Yeah.
ahead of you and you're just kind of like you're practicing, but you're just letting them go. Like sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge. Not for everybody at all. I've definitely seen some athletes that are great at that. They're just like, this is training. That doesn't matter. I've been told to hold it back. That's what I'm going to do. If they want to go hard, they can go hard. How do you kind of sit on that?
That's a good question because I do now have training partners and they're a little bit younger than me.
Right. Yeah.
So
So they're a little bit more eager with that kind
yeah,
of
yeah, a
thing.
little bit more eager. And so what's interesting is that before, I think a couple of years ago, I would definitely like push it. Like if somebody were to challenge me, I was like, hey, I'm gonna finish every rep before you. But I think now I'm at the point where I'm like, sometimes my training partner, Tino, he's a really good guy. He's pretty fast too. He'll kind of get out in front of me and I'll know in my head, I'm like, I'm already hitting the time. So
Okay.
I don't need to push it, right? So I'm more in tune with that. It's like, hey, my coach told me I need to be 26 of the 200. I'm gonna be 26 of the 200. Even if he's 25, it's fine. I'm 26. I know where I'm
Yeah.
supposed to be, right? So and then so that's the kind of with the training partner thing, but also just like we keep it honest. Like as a professional, like there are those tempo days where like I could get into a tempo day and kind of I could not run as fast, but I make
Yeah.
sure I'm honest. Like I make sure that if we are doing some tempo 200s, that I keep it at an honest pace.
Yeah.
Like I make sure I do that just because there to an extent I want to feel like I'm doing something because I feel like for
Yeah.
so long like I have felt that, and so I'm like, all right, I need to feel like I actually got some work in. And to be honest with you, you don't even have to do that every time, because at the end of the day, if you're doing something consistently, no matter what you're doing, like your body's gonna know that, hey, I worked out today, even if you didn't fall out on the ground. I think that's one thing with our like program as well, is like you're not gonna fall out every day. And there's even sometimes in there where you're gonna be like, that's it, like we're done. Like, where's the extra stuff, right? And if and I think our training philosophy is that if you're training hard on those hot sessions like we talked about,
Mhm.
you're not gonna want to you're not gonna want to do anything else. At the end
Yeah.
of the day,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. You're going to need that recover. All that.
you
I know you said it was
you
not a
need it.
recovery day necessarily, but you're going to need that time where you're going like a little bit lighter so that you're. Yeah.
Right. You like we train hard enough on those through the week. Like I don't train normally. I don't train on Saturdays and Sundays. And so most of the times we don't start training on Saturday until we get into the spring season where we're sprinting more and there's warmer days and stuff like that. But that's because like Monday through Friday, we're pushing it. Like we're going we're getting the most out of the week. And so by the time Friday hits, after you've lifted 3 times and you run 300 and you've sprinted and you've done all this volume, it's like I just want to sit down somewhere. Like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, for sure. Like you need those. I think from different things that I've seen that there's different ways to like distribute the training load throughout the week, and if you're going to kind of concentrate it into, if you're going to go through 5 consecutive days, then you probably need those 2 days at the end just to recover from that and come back ready for the next 5 day block the following week. I've seen different people that have, maybe split they've done 3 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off, and they've kind of done it that way throughout the week. But because you're kind of breaking the week, the 5 days of training into two smaller chunks, then you maybe don't need the 2 complete days off at the end of that. So I think there's so many different ways to kind of skin a cat, and yeah, I think like figuring out kind of what works for you, and what you're comfortable with, and also what your coach is comfortable with. And obviously there's some constraints that are going to be placed on you from just things like, can you get access to the track, can you get access to the weight room, all these kind of things that play into that decision making process.
Sure.
And yeah, you kind of work with that and find out what works for you. And clearly this has worked for you, and and for your coach is hugely successful in developing sprinters over, I don't even know how many years. It's I'd like to say
Mm.
it's more than I've been around. It's not, but it's a good few years that he's been producing. I heard a statistic, and I think it was something like more sub 6'5" college guys than any other collegiate coach.
Yeah.
I'd have to fact check that, but I definitely heard that. So he's in the conversation. All right, thank you for that. And so moving on to kind of just speak about like technique and mechanics, and I think this is something else I asked you on your IG live as well, was just speaking about cues. And is there any kind of, have you ever had like an aha moment where coach has said, okay, I want you to try and do this. I want you to think about doing this when you're running, and then it's just resonated and it's just clicked and it's made a significant difference. Or what are some of the cues that you feel that work for you when you're trying to sprint?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think that me and my coach, I'm very like when I say coachable, like there's a lot of things that my coach will tell me or Coach Anderson will tell me, and immediately I don't know, I'm very visual. So if I can see someone even just like not even like full on do the action, but if I can just see like someone imitate it, then I usually can implement it pretty
Right.
quickly. And so I'm really good at the cues. I think that a lot of more than anything, a lot of the cues come from when we're doing like really detailed like block starts and stuff. And so I think when I was in college, one of the biggest cues for me was it was really with because my left leg is forward. That's the leg that I push off of. So
Mm-hmm.
left leg forward, right leg back. And sometimes I'd have really bad reaction time. And to this day, sometimes I still do. But in college, like he would always talk about speeding the right leg or the left leg up. So basically it'd be like trying to get that second step basically down really quickly to get myself back in the race.
Okay.
So a lot of the times, I'd like coming off the block, I'd be so slow that everybody would kind of be like 2 steps ahead of me. And so like really that was one thing that we focused on a lot was like making sure that I have a quick second step. It wasn't necessarily a cue, but it was just something that I was thinking about
Mm-hmm.
cognitively during the block starts. And you can see like my starts changed obviously since I was in college, but a lot of the times it looks rushed, but it wasn't. But a lot of times I would move back into the race because I would just get my second step down really, really quick. So that's one of them. Um, Another one is my coach always does this example where he's like talking about pushing and projecting towards the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, hey, look, like he's like, he said, which way is the finish line? Is it up here or is it down there?
Right.
It's like, well, it's down there. He's like, well, stop going this way and go like the more steps you have in that direction, the faster you're gonna get there, right? And so that was another thing that he told me. Another thing he kind of like gets into this push position. Here's one big cue that actually is kind of like a thing you can see in your head. He says, hey, look, if there's a big 18 wheeler, right? And he says, hey, there's an 18 wheeler, there's a box in front of you, or there's a wall in front of you, and he's like, I need you to move that 18 wheeler. He's like, what position are you going to get in to move the 18 wheeler? And so you think about it, you're not going to stand straight up. You're going to
Yeah.
get down and you're going to be in the exact push position that you need to be in when you come out of the block start. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's where you need to be. You're probably your back leg is going to be fully extended because you're trying to push as hard as you can. You're going to be in triple extension. Like that's where you need to be. And so that was always something that whenever I'm like in the blocks and I have those times where I'm popping up and coming vertical, I always think about that. It's like, okay, make sure that I'm in that push position like I'm about to push an 18 wheeler. Like that's huge. Um, Man, there's so many.
Oh, I'm sure there are. Yeah, I'm sure there are.
Tons,
Yeah.
tons. I would say another good one. Another good one is for me is like keeping my foot like as far as the dorsiflexion when you're talking about when you're sprinting and getting
Mm-hmm.
down the track, coming out of 30, 60, and stuff like that. Um, that's one of them. Just keeping my foot up.
Yeah.
That's one thing,
Okay.
not coming down on that. And then transitioning, because that's a big part. I think that's a lot of times where people lose a lot of their like they work so hard to like get all this strength and power and stuff, and then they kind of mess up in the transition and it kind of ruins their race pattern. And so for me, one of the biggest things is like coming out of transition instead of just like lifting up, he talks about more of like using your arms to transition you out of that, and not necessarily like, so if you're coming out of transition, you're usually in between 25, 30 meters, 20, 30 meters, depending on who you are. Some younger kids, probably it's a lot sooner.
Yep.
But in between 20 and 30, like I'm more of using my arms to transition from 20 to 30 instead of thinking about my lower body.
Okay.
So it's more moving my arms quicker so that the feet speed up, right? Because you think about it, your arms move faster, your feet move faster. So it's more about using your arms to move you through that position from 20 to 30.
Yep.
And again, it's a smooth transition, not like jerking out of it.
Yeah, I like that, smooth. I think that's a really kind of like key word to it. Just everything's kind of just very gradual, very smooth. Yeah, not no kind of sudden abrupt sort of changes in posture or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the biggest thing. If you can make your transition from 20 to 30, if you can make that as smooth as possible, it's going to set up the rest of your run. So it's going to set up from 30 to 100, that last 70 meters. So that is probably, if not like outside of the block start, which I think too many people put so much emphasis on the block start, which you can get so technical with that. Like, do
Yeah.
you drag your foot? Do you not? Do you, there's, at the end of the day, I saw Tyson Gave run 969 with a point like 9 or like 0.20 reaction. So if you're telling me that the start matters, then go watch that video, because I don't think it matters as much as I mean, it matters, yes, but does it matter as much as we like pick it apart and like
Well,
just the
also it's like, how does
details?
it matter? Because I think there's a big argument that like a big part of the role of the start is to set everything else later on up. So you're getting yourself in a good position to continue your acceleration,
And
rather than
and
just.
and you said it though. You said it. Good position,
Mhm.
not reaction time. Everyone's like, "Oh, I reacted slow." Well, it doesn't matter if you react slow if you pop straight up. Like if you don't have good position, that's the start mechanics, is good position. Because if you have bad position, then it doesn't set the rest of the race up. Even if you're point two, you can go back to the Diamond League in 2018. I got second place and my foot was still on the pedal when everyone was taking their second step. It was because I still stayed patient and I was in the right position. And that's why I was able to come second in that race,
Yeah, yeah,
even after a terrible start.
yeah. What I'm going to do, Ronnie, is real quick, is we've got less than a minute because I'm cheap and I haven't upgraded to Zoom Pro yet.
All
So
good.
I'm going to send you through another link and then we're just going to finish this off afterwards. I won't take up too much more of your time. Is
Yeah,
that good with you?
that's perfect.
All right, I'll be in contact in a second.
All right, cool.
Thank you.